All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. I hope you've had a great morning, afternoon, a great lunch. We're really excited to have you here today. So, today our session is titled Balancing the Grid in an Era of Electrification. I'll be your moderator. My name is Ricky Murray. I work for Doer Maker as their senior creative strategist. I work with utilities and solution providers across the US and overseas to tell their story of electrification in a more succinct manner that is understandable for everyone. So, joining us on this panel today, we have three amazing panelists. I'll let them go down the row and introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about them. So, we'll start with you, Dan.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'm Dan Foreman, CEO at Copper Labs. We help energy and water utilities take control of demand by engaging consumers with real-time data. So we've got devices that are proprietary that unlock the data that's already in these meters. There's a lot more data available out there than you might imagine, and so we're helping utilities to decarbonize faster by getting a dual fuel of gas and electric, for example, modernize grids more effectively by leveraging existing assets so that we can free up the billions we need to actually electrify effectively.
Venkat.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Venkat Tirupati. I have two distinct roles at ERCOT. I serve all the IT, DevOps engineering teams, and I'm also spearheading all the grid transformation related research and innovation efforts at ERCOT. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here. Thank you. Tracy.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tracy Alexander. I'm with NRG Energy. We're a power and gas provider across the U.S. We are a retail electricity provider here in ERCOT, and my responsibility is to guide our strategy and innovation for our virtual power plants. And we'll talk more about if that means anything to any of you right at this moment. We'll talk more about that as the panel goes on, but also very happy to be here and be part of the conversation.
Yes, thanks. Welcome to ETS, all three of you. You're familiar with ETS. You've been here before. So welcome back, and welcome to you two. So today we're really going to take an honest look at what utilities need to do to ensure that our grid is balanced with an increasing amounts of electrification going on, whether it's through EVs or other various methods. And so one of our first questions, we'll just dive right in, will be for you, Venkat. So with the increasing electrification, in various sectors, what are some of the key challenges that ERCOT faces in maintaining grid balance? And can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I'm assuming that you all know what ERCOT does. ERCOT is the grid operator of Texas. We make sure that the grid is reliable and we are running the markets, efficient markets, and things like that, right? So for us, electrification is a big deal, and when you think about it, with the projections of electrified load in Texas, it's going to fundamentally affect how ERCOT operates, right? So if you start looking at what ERCOT does, starting from resource adequacy, from long-term planning, looking at operational planning, looking at forecasting, looking at day-to-day operations, the fact that electrified load, is going to come at such a rapid pace, is just going to affect all of that. And to give you a very specific example in terms of how we are looking at it, and electrification, as Ricky, as you said, mostly maybe transportation, buildings and residential in terms of HVAC, water heaters, etc., and of course industrial processes, right? And the way it will probably impact us right away is the profiles that we see in terms of the load. And if you all know, this region is a summer peaking region, and we've been blasting all sorts of records over the last few years. And our summer peak is 85 gigawatts now, and our winter peak is not very behind. It's about 78 gigawatts that we hit in January of this year. So it's only about 7 gigawatts of difference. We think with the increased electrification that we will start seeing winter overtake summer, at a system level in terms of the peak demand, and also in terms of day to day. Right now, maybe on a good summer day, you might see the peak at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. But then we think with increased electrification, you might start seeing two peaks, one in the morning and one maybe in the 5 o'clock time period, right? And also, maybe the peak won't be that important anymore. It's the net load that will become very important for us. And so it's not the 3 to 5 that we are worried about. It will be probably 9 p.m. that I'm worried about, or maybe 7, 8 a.m. that I'm worried about, right? So I think electrification is really going to have a massive impact on how ERCOT operates. Yeah.
So part of electrification, I think technology plays a key role in making sure that the balance of our grid is maintained properly. So Dan, I kind of want to turn to you and kind of ask you how do you see the role of technology coming into play for all of this, especially when it comes to utilities who are monitoring this, or maybe even with ERCOT monitoring the Texas grid?
Yeah, I think Venkat's point was interesting because why is that winter peak going to be different now? When gas goes away, the electric grid's not really equipped to do that. And so we're instrumenting gas, water, and electric grids wirelessly to get that integrated view. And we published a case study last year with National Grid, which has something compelling that we weren't even looking for. So, a lot of what we do for Northeast utilities is behavioral gas demand response. And so we published this great case study with National Grid. We demonstrated an 18% peak load reduction behaviorally. And then when we dug into that data, we weren't really looking for this, but we could acquire 30-second interval gas data instead of every 30 days. And so when you look at data at that interval and you compare similar homes in similar conditions, we were able to identify inefficient HVAC. And so we thought that was pretty compelling for a couple reasons. One, all these utilities have energy efficiency targeting budgets. And if you can get that and market to the 20% of people that can deliver 80% of what you're looking for, there's efficiency. But even further than that, when you look at those inefficient homes, they fall into really 3 groups for us. One is, boy, these people have a really terrible building envelope. You're going to probably just want to get them a more efficient gas furnace while you figure the rest of this out, all the way to the other end of the spectrum of pretty much a brand new home, good building envelope, they're ready for an electric heat pump. But if you try to boil the ocean and electrify everybody all at the same time without, that kind of an insight, you're going to have a real challenge. Whereas if you sequence it based on ground truth data to know this is the next best home to electrify, it's going to be a much more efficient path.
So with all of this innovation, Tracy, for you, energy has really kind of been on that forefront of innovation. So can you talk to us a little about, from your perspective, what are the most promising innovations or solutions that can assist utilities in managing that grid balance effectively?
Well, one innovation is real-time change in your headshot on the ETS screen. Thank you. But as the director of VPP Strategy and Innovation, it's my obligation to say that VPPs are the next innovative thing that we're thinking about. And so I just wanted to ask, though, when I say virtual power plant, like how many of you got that? You understand what that is? Great. So even within our own organization, it's a challenge sometimes to help people understand because we are a power generator. And so when I think about VPP and why I'm so excited about it is because virtual power plants are, you explain virtual power plants with more acronyms. So virtual power plants are aggregations of DERs. But what we're talking about is customers are adopting more distributed energy resources. And as we can centrally connect with those DERs, aggregate them, then we can balance the load by lowering the demand on the grid. And so rather than building a new peaker plant to address these, record-breaking peaks that we're seeing in ERCOT and in other markets, you can aggregate this load from consumers and have a real impact during those peak times. And we've seen that even last summer. And so NRG is looking at, many customers are already adopting smart thermostats, but we've already mentioned other things that customers are adopting and in new homes. I just bought a new home and I have many options of electrifying my blinds or anything in my home. And so as we think about innovation, I think we have to really think about what our customers are doing and how they're behaving differently and how not just about it's more demand on the grid, but how can we reduce that demand in an effective way that saves customers money. And I think that's a real difference in how we're looking at energy and the energy usage.
Yeah, so when it comes to customers, and as we're electrifying, we definitely want to make sure that there's stability there. So a question maybe for all of you is, how can we ensure that it's equitable and that access is there for everyone, especially when it comes to that sustainability of the grid?
I can start. One of the things that we talk about, you talk about aggregating VPPs of thermostats, and that's been state of the art for residential demand response. But smart thermostats are present in maybe 20% of U.S. homes. 10% of those people will participate, and so we're a big fan of behavioral programs. If you can unlock whole home data, you can engage everyone. And if you think about disadvantaged communities or low moderate income folks, they might not have DERMS capable appliances. They tend to be more expensive. They might not have reliable Wi-Fi. And so we consistently think about ways to bring more people into that. And I think one of the other challenges, and this is probably going to be provocative, is that we need to pay for performance. If we want to continue to send out these messages and say, hey, it's a peak day, please do your part. I watch Energy Twitter, and I love you guys at ERCOT, but they're saying, pay me, bro. And it works. And if you look at the wholesale VPPs, people behave when you pay them. And so I think utilities should be taking a really proven practice of dynamic load flex incentives and applying them at scale. If we look at some of these wholesale market VPPs, they've done it effectively. Utilities can do that at a dramatically larger scale.
Well, I got to respond to that.
I knew I was getting in trouble.
No, I think, we are paying you, bro. So,
Nice.
in that sense, ERCOT being the sort of the ISO and RTO, I think we are slowly coming to the realization that the grid doesn't really end at 60 kV or 69 kV, that the grid really goes all the way to the plug in your house, right? And with the VPP programs that Tracy talked about, I think ERCOT was a pioneer in sort of kicking the ADER pilot, and we are already in phase 2 of that. There's about 80 megawatts of demand response that we are very interested in. And I think companies are figuring out really how to get the customers engaged and how to really participate in the ADER pilot. And we are seeing increased interest in the ADER, at least, and I think it's already in phase 2, right? But then from ERCOT's perspective, we have to figure out the systems and the technology and all of that as well to make sure that it's a seamless integration with the way we operate, right? And in terms of the payments question that Dan raised, we started out with ADRs can participate in non-spin, 80 megawatts, right, out of the 80 megawatts. And we are also saying now that, hey, you can also dip into ECRS, for example. That's another revenue source, that you have. And ERCOT is really looking at demand flexibility as a serious option, because we do know that it's not just about supply all the time. We have to really seriously consider demand flexibility as well. And Tracy, you mentioned that we are seeing a lot of demand response. And for one of the conservation notices that we sent out recently, we saw about 5 to 6 gigawatt of response that we just did not expect, right? And so there is a lot of demand response that is already out there. And from ERCOT's perspective, I need to know how much is out there so that I can plan properly. And I need to have systems in place so that I'm getting all that information so that I could forecast and predict and all of that well, right? So ERCOT is very serious about that, and I'm sure you'll see a lot of action from our side on that.
Yeah, and I can just add to that. We call it a do-it-yourself program. So it's a behavioral demand response program, and so I want to touch on that because I do think that's really important. We do know there's several surveys out there, and it's not just in Texas, although it might be a little higher in Texas, of the number of customers that will not let you control any device in their home ever. Like, they're never going to let you do that. And I may be one of them, not sure. But we know that they exist, and so when we talk about VPPs, part of an effective VPP and like being able to provide ERCOT with the information they need to know how much flexible demand is out there and available is being able to connect with those devices, whether it's a smart thermostat, a battery storage system, an electric vehicle. And so I think the behavioral demand response is a really great way to engage customers who, quite frankly, just can't afford those devices. Those are, even at the thermostat level, they can be, it can be an expensive proposition if you're worried about whether you can pay your electric bill or not. And so as a retail electricity provider, our customers, at least here in ERCOT, can choose to go somewhere else. And so we're looking for ways to help customers, partnering with OEMs, partnering with other people in the market, and participating in ERCOT's programs to help customers understand the adoption, understand the value that they're generating, and can also get paid, bro, by participating in a virtual power plant program.
Interesting point. If I can just, Tracy mentioned she might not want the utility to control things in her home, and I think there's a lot of that. So as an example, I got an EV about 1.5 years ago. I didn't report it to Xcel in Colorado. They don't know. From their visibility, I'm just using too much energy. And so, for me, I don't know everybody else's preference. I'm not going to let Xcel take control of a battery. I mean, the idea that we're going to let people cycle a $20,000 battery for a $20 incentive, I think we need to think harder about that. But if you can take a behavioral approach and see in real time, hey, Dan, you just plugged in your EV during peak hours. If you were to wait until after 9, you'll use wind instead of coal. It'll cost you half as much. And oh, by the way, sign up for this TOU rate program, and you're going to save $500 a year. And so I'd encourage us to expand our thinking instead of thinking everything has got to be direct load control. Everybody wants the same thing, to just unlock the data, come up with a program that works for anybody.
Right. I think, there needs to be show the price to the end customers, which I don't think happens very well in the electric utility industry right now. Once you show the price, I'm sure there'll be behavioral changes that people will make, right? And I can give you an example for that. I'm with Google Fi, who is my cellular provider. And I locked in with them maybe 3-4 years ago when they were just starting out. So I pay about $35 per month, but then I get only 2 GB. And every time I hit my 2 GB and go beyond that, I get a reminder from them saying that, hey, it's going to cost you $10 for every GB that you consume, right? That changes my behavior. And I'm not watching my cricket or some sport, when I'm not on Wi-Fi. I go home and I catch the highlights because I don't want to pay $10 more, right? So the moment you start showing prices to consumers, I think you can start expecting some behavioral changes, yeah.
Over the past couple of days, one of the continuous themes that we hear is that communication aspect, especially for the customers. And all three of you have definitely just touched on that. So I kind of want to expand a little further on that and ask, how can we be sure that these energy consumers actually are understanding the benefits of electrification? I know you understand, we all understand. However, we work in the space. So for people who maybe don't, how can we communicate that electrification actually is the huge benefit on an understandable level?
I'll start, and then funny enough, I wasn't smart enough to know this. So I outed myself on this a couple days ago on a podcast. We remodeled a 100-year-old house in Boulder and put in a bunch of gas appliances, put in a bunch of new gas lines to do this and that, put in a lawn, put in irrigation, and we're running out of water. And I was doing this at the time, and I wasn't smart enough to know that I might not want to use gas, and certainly have preference. But I think for the same reason I talk to people about why I really like an EV. Yeah, I like the energy efficiency, but it's just more fun to drive. The people that I see driving toward electrification in the home, they come and talk about their induction stove, like boiling water faster. And so I think you have to find what are those interesting fun bits, because some people, we identify economic archetypes for people that will respond to behavioral events, and some are purely economical. If I can save $100 a year, I'm going to take action. Some are purely environmental, meaning if I know that it's cleaner to not only not burn gas to cook my food, but not have to turn on the vent to keep from breathing it in. And then there's others that just want the cool new stuff. And so I think figuring out a way to communicate what that is to people without all the nerdy utility-driven stuff that we all understand.
Tracy, Venkat, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was thinking about some of the things that you were saying as you were talking there, Dan. I think it's an interesting question. I think it's a tough question to some degree because, like you said, you're here and you're doing this every day, and we still don't know all of the benefits. So I think it's going to take time to really help people understand the benefits of electrification. But one of the things I've been advocating for within our organization is that we, as a group of people, need to be ready for that to happen quickly. I think it could be a bit of a hockey stick, where right now maybe education, people are just learning about it, just starting to understand. We did some conjoint studies with our customers at NRG, and it was fascinating to me that some of the customers who do have electric vehicles, have already installed battery storage, they are very, very aware of their impact on the grid, how they could help their neighbor during an outage, and they're just very engaged in that conversation. So that's not a customer we necessarily need to educate right now. But I think as we see, more appliances, more people renovating their homes, and just a natural progression of adoption of electric appliances in the home, of the vehicle, we're going to start to see that education increase across our markets. But I do think there's probably we're going to be slow going, and then customers will start looking to all of us to help educate them. And we need to be prepared for that.
Because we are ERCOT, we are not a rep. My answer is going to, be a little bit different to this. After winter storm Uri, I think a lot of people are paying attention to what's happening in the industry in general. If you randomly just pick 100 people and ask, who knows ERCOT, probably the answer before Uri would have been maybe 80% didn't know what ERCOT was. But now for everything that happens on the grid, everybody seems to think ERCOT is the reason for that. But even within the sort of the sample sets that I have, the WhatsApp groups in the community and the neighborhoods and things like that, the moment there's a conservation notice that goes out, everybody are paying attention. There's just a lot more emphasis on electricity in general and what's happening within the industry in general, which probably is a good thing for awareness.
So all three of you kind of definitely are in different parts of the energy space, and so I'd like to hear from you about how you each envision regulators, utilities, tech providers, how the ecosystem that we currently have built in the energy space, if we could just wave a magic wand and say, this is exactly how I think they should operate and be effective, what does that look like for each of you? We could reverse it, and Tracy can start first, actually.
I think that's a really great question, and I'm going to sort of go back to the customer. I mean, we're very customer focused in ERCOT, especially as a retail electricity provider, like I said. So the customers are adopting the technologies for specific purposes, reliability, resiliency. Customers want to have control over some of those things, or they want to have a lot of control over how their home consumes energy. And so and it's not just because you're sitting here, but I've worked in different markets with different customers over the course of my career here at NRG, and many of the markets are waiting on FERC 2222, or they're trying to meet FERC 2222 obligations. ERCOT didn't need to do that, but created a program to start the ADER, Aggregated Distributed Energy Resource Pilot, to help us and our customers participate and understand what that means, not just a pilot for pilot purposes. I've heard a couple of people on panels talk about it already this week, and it is really helping to understand what is available out on the grid, what can be used, how we can use it for ancillary services, for economic purposes. And I think, even in my prior comments, we need to get ready. If I could wave a magic wand, we would all have a sense of urgency of not waiting for our customers, not waiting for someone else to make a move, but kind of have this sense of urgency that we're collectively working toward this idea of electrification and its impact on the grid.
We talked about that a little, about how the problems are here today, so we all should have the urgency today rather than in 5 years. Venkat.
Well, what does utopia looks for us is, the way I think about it is flexible generation, which is technology agnostic, flexible demand with everybody participating who want to participate and getting paid as well if they want to participate in the market, and then enough transmission that we don't really deal with congestion issues at all, right? I mean, for me, that's like dream, right? And then enough incentives for the generation to actually make money in the market, and enough incentives for the people who are participating in the market on the demand side to actually make money as well, right? So for us to really get there, I think there needs to be a lot of policy that needs to change in terms of how we deal with the distribution, systems and the data from the distribution systems, how they can actually participate in the various markets. That needs to change. And I need to work with a lot of utilities very closely, because right now there is a sense that, hey, ERCOT, you operate at this level, don't get into our sort of area, right? We deal with this, right? You don't get there. But then now there's so much that is happening in the distribution side that it actually starts impacting ERCOT. So I better know what's happening there, right? So there needs to be changes in the mindset of utilities within the region, right? There needs to be changes in the mindset of the policymakers. And we all really need to work together, because the grid is just a continuum all the way to the house, right? So yeah, a lot of collaboration needs to happen.
I would echo that. I sat in the session before this, and it was all about regulatory. And I consistently say regulators, utilities, and technology providers like us should all be in the same room consistently. And so one of the panelists said, to the utility crowd, like, go to NARUC. You need to show up at NARUC. And if you don't know what it is, National Association of Regulated Utility Commissioners, I didn't know what it was a year and a half ago. And, I have the good fortune to have a former regulator on our board now. And you just wouldn't think a little venture-backed tech startup like Copper would need to go spend all this time in regulatory. It's 80% of our marketing budget. We go to every NARUC. I spend time briefing their staff. And what we found is they're thirsty for that knowledge. They don't, they're so focused and working through dockets and doing what they do every day, they don't look up to see, oh, here's some brand new way to think about VPPs or paying for dynamic load flex. And so I think that getting to the point where we have more of a open forum of, like, let's work together, not like you guys go in that room and have a conversation, then we'll go over here and have a conversation, and by the time it gets to the other room, the substance is lost.
Yeah. Partnerships, communication, urgency.
Yeah, I would add to that. There's another organization called VP3 out of the Rocky Mountain Institute that is also specifically around virtual power plants, working across utilities, regulators, trying to connect those dots. So maybe my magic wand is really happening in a lot of spaces. So it's not that I don't think some of these things that we're talking about aren't happening, because I think there are, like NARUC, VP3, some others that are really concentrated on this topic and really thinking through it and engaging a cross section of us to think through the next the next point and the next idea and how to incorporate it.
Definitely. So right now we have a little bit of time left, so we could probably open up for a few questions if we have some in the room. Anita, I saw your hand shoot up first. Go ahead.
Well, first, thank you. What an amazing session.
There's also a mic back here if you would like one.
Thank you so much. No, I just wanted to first say thank you very much for the panel discussion. It's been, I'm on the edge of my seat. I have a lot to say, so I'm gonna try to say this simply. When I think about this, and I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I have to tell you, CPS Energy, right? San Antonio, we talked about this early. We are large. We are growing. We have a lot of historic redlining. We're over 300 years old, and most of those buildings are, pre-building codes, right? And so, the question where does, access, equity, inclusion? A lot of it is like when we start talking about all these different pieces of technology. We talked about this earlier today, about how, well, when you get down to the building level, it's like, well, some of these homes, it's like, well, you're gonna have to replace all the wiring first, and this, that, and the other. We have a great divide. It's a great electrical divide between access to electrification, because not just of externalized infrastructure, and that's a whole other deal right there, right? It's like $1 billion a mile or something to bury the poles in our older parts of our community, but there will be no balancing of the grid when we have, all this cheddar on the street. I'm saying, when like all the older buildings are using all of the energy and don't have the same level of access. That's a very complicated problem, but it is at the heart of what we're doing, because, for me, energy in this whole journey of electrification is about improving the lives of people, right? Electrification of any form brings education, medicine. That's what energy is. So I'll just kind of ask you that broadly. I understand sometimes we think of the grid as itself, but for me, again, balancing that grid, it really comes down to what are we going to do about all the existing buildings and access.
I'll dive into that one. I think it's a very relevant and hard question to answer, right? And I think that the DOE has some funding, some GRIP funding that they've, and the loan program office, like there's multiple opportunities to apply for funding for various energy projects. That's sort of a broad sweep. And they have a focus on the Justice 40 initiative. So you have to demonstrate your ability to meet the Justice 40 requirements in terms of providing jobs where these buildings or these homes exist that don't need a smart thermostat. They need HVAC. They need a sealed home. They need better insulation. And so we looked at that, and that was I love that that's part of the requirements for the funding, and there's billions of dollars available, and I think that's one step. It's not the answer, but it's one step in terms of, because that's going to cost money to get these buildings or homes up to a place where then they can consider electrification. And so I think that's one avenue that the Department of Energy is taking to facilitate that. And I've seen some of the funds that have been allocated, and it seems to be going to a lot of really great projects across the U.S.
I was just going to add one piece to that, is that if you don't pick those off soon enough, the people left on the gas system, as the subscriber base wanes, they're going to be paying more necessarily. So it's a double.
That's at the heart of it. And actually, I really was interested if you had anything to say from your perspective.
I think maybe not from an ERCOT perspective, but from a personal perspective, right? I think there needs to be education on some of the aspects that you talked about, because sitting at ERCOT, I don't hear about those things, right? And we are so focused on sort of the technology and running the grid that we don't focus on the equity and the access issues. So I feel there needs to be more education on some of these aspects, and also enough incentives from, be it at a federal level, at a state level, at a local level, to sort of start affecting some of the behaviors that we want to see, right, and some of the changes we want to see. So it has to be done at that level, I feel, from a policy perspective.
My name is Dora, and I'm with Apparent. It's a clean tech provider of technologies. And I know that, and thank you very much for sharing your perspective of the future of the grid, Venkat. That was a really great summary of a complex system. And Dan, your point about bringing the aggregator, the legislative folks, the regulators, the people who are developing and designing, and also the folks that are in the communities together, I think is great. And getting to kind of, Tracy, your comment about the new regulations that are evolving and coming. Have you guys seen the new NERC, the FERC NERC, new inverter-based, the IBR, inverter-based resource 3-year plans that is currently in development? Because part of the question I have is, if you look at the way that it's being done, again, getting to your point down, is how do we engage with that process? Because the industry folks that are actually putting this stuff in the ground and doing the work, and the community folks that are engaging and educating the community, really don't have a lot of bandwidth to sit in a lot of legislative conversation. However, venues like this and folks like Ricky and his team, the point is that we can actually begin to bridge more. And are there maybe talking sessions so that you don't have to sit as from ERCOT coming all the way down to the communities, maybe engaging with our industry folks like us who are developing the technologies to kind of connect, and maybe kind of following up on some of those core things, and in your venues being able to recommend those kind of connections. I just feel like the IRB stuff coming in, and I used to work for a utility, so when I read it, I was like, yeah, makes sense, top down, utility down. But when we're looking at all this plug and play coming in from the consumer landscape, customers want choice. Customer wants opportunities to do what they need. They want savings, and they want a utility who's going to be there to have their back. But the cost is, I think, mentioned by a lot of folks. That was a huge issue. So just your thoughts on that, because I see that as the next thing that's going to come down, and it may cause more bumps on the road.
I think it's a challenging issue, and from our perspective, and like I said, we're relatively nascent in engaging in the regulatory front, but it's still blocking and tackling from specialists. And as an example, a lot of what we do right now is behavioral gas demand response, and there was a docket in New Jersey where the regulators basically sent out and said, we can't do gas DR because we don't have AMI. We had to personally go, Ezzy, who runs policy for us, had to go and personally intervene in that rate case and say, no, here is a different technology solution. And I see it as one of the foundational problems for people like us that are trying to bring new information into those groups. And so how do we do it? Through expensive firms that do regulatory engagement, lobbyists. And so that's not a sustainable model, but that is state of the art from my limited perspective.
I used to work for NERC, and if you want to make a change, I think you need to get more involved, right? I mean, don't assume that everybody knows all the different things that you all are going through. Everybody has their own lens of looking at the world, and for you to put your perspective out there, you need to be more engaged. And I can give you a couple of maybe a technology example. In the IT world, all things about virtualization and things like that. NERC never really embraced that, but then when the utilities realized that, hey, we need to push the envelope here, they started getting more engaged with sort of the drafting teams and attending the sessions and meetings and start influencing some of the policies there. And in the end, there are some nice standards that came out of that, right? So my advice would be just you got to get involved. Otherwise, you're not going to see the change that you want to see.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Donnie Hollerschutz. So with electric vehicles, if one thinks of a household and that has like 2 cars, and one thinks of a neighborhood where everybody has 2 cars, that household and that neighborhood will probably have enough energy with a fully charged electric vehicle or the 2 electric vehicles to power the house for like 2 weeks, right? Or like a week or over a week or something like that. If it's 2, if you have a Hummer, obviously you're going to have more than if you have like a shorter distance. So that's a lot of energy, and it could provide a lot of different services to the grid. And so how are you, but not everybody's willing to sort of allow for that, energy storage capacity to be used as a resource. What are some of the challenges and opportunities you see with actually using that as a resource? Because it could really be a game changer if you fully use it in capacity expansion. You might not need short-term, energy storage essentially in the system. You could use the electric vehicles. How do you guys think about the challenges and opportunities there?
I can start because I shared my views on my electric vehicle earlier. I think this is probably not popular. I think V to G is vapor. I think V to H is how you appeal to self-interest. Like if I could have a way to ensure that my house would be backed up, I bought a Model Y. It's got 3x the capacity of a Powerwall. Like I wanted to do solar in a Powerwall, but I spent it all on the car. And so if you look at like how do I make it appeal to my self-interest, it still effectively benefits the grid. If all I'm interested in is backing up my house, I think this is a big reason why the Ford F-150 Lightning has crossed a cultural divide. And a lot of Texans are like, you don't tread on me, but like if I can back up my own house with this, I think the grid still wins.
That's their favorite.
Yeah.
Is the anything?
I think Venkat, you probably have something to say about this, but I agree with you. I think that right now, when I kind of was talking about that hockey stick, like I think electric vehicle adoption is still not where it's going to be in the very near future, for many of the reasons that you mentioned and kind of what we're talking about in terms of that Ford F-150. And so my responsibility is to have a program or a rate plan that a customer can enroll in and can sign up for that makes sense for them, knowing that they're potentially pushing energy back to the grid. But then it's, it's really important for us to know that, because that creates if there's that many people with that much power generating or at their home, then we need to know how that's going to impact the grid. Like, we need to know that that level of powering your home, and like as a provider, I need to know that you're going to be able to power your home, and that you're going to do that so that I'm not generating power that's not needed. And then, you need to know that if it's going to be pushed back out onto the grid.
Correct. I mean, some of that is on the distribution side, but at least from my ERCOT perspective, as long as we know that if a particular entity is participating in the ancillary services market, and then they say that, well, I have 10 megawatts for you, if I'm trusting that entity saying that that 10 megawatt is out there when I need it, and if that particular vehicle can actually push it back to the grid, I mean, ERCOT can be completely technology agnostic as long as we are getting what we need, right?
So we have about 1 minute left. And so in this last minute, I don't know if anyone does yoga in the room, but at the end of every yoga session, you set a positive intention for the day, for what you want to accomplish, for just the future. So if all three of you could maybe just give a 30-second on your positive intentions for a balanced grid of the future, what that looks like, and maybe just a lasting message for the people in the room to maybe think about as we continue throughout the day and the rest of us balancing the grid.
I'd say question your assumptions. A lot of the things on which we're building this next phase of grid mod are flawed premises. And it's easy to look and say, well, we've got all this history of approving X, and it's easier to do that than experiment with something new. I'd like to see us, I know you're in DevOps, Agile, like take an Agile approach. Don't take a 24 to 7 year time span and say, I'm going to make this big bet and see what happens. Break it down into a small increment, go test the new frontier stuff and see what happens.
I think from my perspective, yes, there are a lot of challenges, but there are a lot of opportunities as well. The grid is rapidly transforming, and I think there needs to be a lot of focus on innovation and research and things like that, and we could certainly solve a lot of the challenges that are being presented to us.
Yeah, think about what our yoga session is called, and Energy Thought Summit. So I guess I do think about, how I would personally take that challenge of how would I set my intention. And I agree with what y'all just said, because it is about thinking about things differently. And we tend to, just as people, sometimes we look at the challenges and we're like, okay, this is going to be really hard. What if it's not? What if it's not really hard? And so that's the way I would want to think about even myself personally in my day. Like, what if this isn't so difficult? What if I can do this? And I would challenge each of us to think in that way.
With that note, I want to thank all three of you. Please give a round of applause for our panelists up here. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you all enjoy the rest of your ETS experience. Thanks for joining us.